Well, could you invest differently than social media tells you to invest and come out with a little bit less risk, maybe more consistent return? Today, we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, if you've got a question for me, please go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. Once you get to the site, go up to the top of the webpage. You'll see a link where you can submit your questions, and I'll get them answered for you. That's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Also, make sure you're signed up for the email newsletter list. That will keep you posted as to what we send out and keep you up to date what we're thinking of Prudent Money. So that's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Yesterday, we talked about the abundance of financial advice in social media, especially we talked about TikTok, which is a hugely popular, maybe the most popular social media site out there. Definitely in the top of all those sites. And what was brought to my attention, which I didn't really know until I checked it out, that TikTok has a financial advice channel with a lot of contributors giving out financial advice. And so I immediately wanted to check some of this advice out and came up with some disturbing concerns about the advice that was being given. Now, having said that, let's keep in mind, and we talked about this all throughout the entire show yesterday, is that anything that's given on, any advice that's given on TikTok is advice that is given as an opinion, not hard, cold facts. It's all an opinion, and don't think otherwise. And the only way that you know if an opinion was right or wrong is the future. So we got to go way into the future to see, well, that was a really good piece of advice or a really bad piece of advice. So keep that in mind. It's so very important. We talk opinions here on Prudent Money and things that we feel like have a high probability of being right. Not saying we're right, not saying we're wrong, and not saying the other person's wrong. And I think that's very important to be able to take in from that filter and really analyze what's being talked about. And I think given, and we'll talk a little bit about this today, is that for those of you who think that you'll never understand how money works, that money just intimidates you, money is something that can't be understood, it's because you haven't learned to ask the right questions. And that's what's the problem is we're not asking enough of the right questions. We're just taking this advice that's given out and we're believing and accepting, which is even scarier, the assumptions that are being made. And I think you got to be very careful because it's dangerous just to believe and adapt with, once again, asking the right questions. So what are some of the assumptions that are being made? I mean, this is what you really want to know. So the first one is, and this is very common to most social media type financial advice platforms, is that it's easy. It's easy to do X, easy to do Y. It's broken down into 3 steps, maybe 5 steps. Just follow those steps and you'll be taken care of, no problem. You'll get exactly what you want. Nothing, and please hear me out, nothing works that way, or is guaranteed to work that way. There's too many moving parts when it comes to money. There's too many things that could go wrong. The other assumption is that this is going to make your money last. Probably one of the biggest concerns for most investors is the question, will my money last? Will I lose too much? Will I not gain enough? Will I be without money, by the time I'm age 75? Very valid questions. But the assumption being made is you'll never run out of money, which I think is a dangerous assumption to be on a social media channel saying, for one, because like I said, anything can happen. It's the other assumption is, and we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later, is that that environments never change. That if you invest into XYZ fund for a certain reason, that it's going to do that reason just like it's done in the past and into the future. Always remember there's one big reason why regulators won't let financial advisors like myself give advice that says, if it did it in the past, it's going to do it in the future. That is not guaranteed, and it's a dangerous assumption to go by because the past does not predict the future. Even though you'd like to think that it does, anything can change, anything can go a different direction. The other one is that bull market, and I'll explain what these are. Bull market and bear market cycles just don't seem to exist. And, the bull market is a time where people make great money in the stock market. The market generally goes up for a very long time. We started our latest bull market in 2009, still going today. The question always is, though, will it turn into a bear market cycle? Which there's so many people in the industry that think that's the craziest notion that'll happen. But if you look at what history has said, and that there is definitely a probability, a high probability, that it will happen. And so it means, though, that if that's a probability, then you want to be prepared for that probability and know what to do in the event that that happens. The other thing that's very important to understand is that declines in the stock market where people lose money do happen. And most of the financial media advice, social media advice will tell you absolutely corrections or short-term declines will happen, but the market generally goes up over time. The problem with that is it's not exactly accurate, is that there are time periods within the market that the stocks are a horrible place to be, that they lose a lot of money. Let's look at 2008 to 2007, or 2009, which was the last big financial crisis bear market that we had. And that period of time, stocks lost over 50%. The problem with that type of a loss is that it takes time to recover. And what you want to be, what you especially want to be zeroed in on when you're talking to anybody, and the question you want to ask is, how long do you feel like the recovery time would be to get your money back, to be back to even before it started losing money? That is critical that you have a good idea and that you prepared for that, because it's going to be during that time that you don't want to touch the investments that have lost tremendous amounts of money. You want to let them make that money back before you start taking money out again. And we'll talk about that. I think that is one of the most critical pieces of advice that can be given, is that you've got to be able to fill the gap of markets when they lose that much money. If you look at it, the 2007 and 2009, it did not make back the loss, or in other words, you did not get back to 2007 numbers or money in your portfolio until roughly 2013. It depends on what you were doing, how you were doing it. But the general market information, or general market investing, would be 2009 to 2013, which is a long time that you've got to cover. And remember, we are our own worst enemy. What is going to be there to prevent you from using emotion to override the strategy? If you know you're going to do these 5 things with your investment portfolio, but yet the market is getting pounded every day, just like it was in 2008 when Lehman Brothers, the biggest brokerage company in the entire world, collapsed and went bankrupt. What are you going to do with that emotion? You're just going to say, too bad for Lehman, boy. But no, you're going to see how that affects your investments, and there's a good chance that you will react emotionally unless you go to your financial advisor and the financial advisor convinces you that stay invested for the long term. Although there is some truth to that, there's also some other things that you need, some disclaimers that you need to know what's going on as well. So let's talk a little bit about one of the advisors that actually he's not an advisor anymore. He does He gives financial advice out for free so you can benefit from it. That's kind of his gig. And he starts out with $2 million in retirement money. He said, this is how I would invest $2 million in retirement money. Doesn't really tell you what the client needs. If someone comes to me and they say, Bob, I've got X amount of dollars in investments, I figure that that will grow to a certain amount of retirement, and I need X amount of dollars a month after inflation is taken into consideration to fulfill my goals. One of the most important numbers that a client can come to me with is Bob, not how much I need to make. This is what I need. Because you got to go in from the backside. You got to find out what the amount of money is that this client needs to survive, or have it not survive at the simplest form, but have the lifestyle that they would like. They've got to make X amount of money. That is crucial. That is the focus of everything. From there, you back up and you go, in order to make this kind of return, this kind of growth on your money that will allow you to have this kind of lifestyle, you've got to do this and you've got to do that. And this is the downside to going with that direction. This is the upside. What could go wrong. This is what could go right. And you got to have a good feel for, yeah, this makes sense, or no, I'm not that comfortable with it. So this is the advice, and I'll have to take a break here in just a minute, so we'll have to stop and pick back up. He starts with 50%. This gives me a little bit of heartburn. 50% of a stock market index, meaning you're going to perform just like stocks. And you're probably thinking, well, Bob, have you seen the stock market in the last 5 or 6 years? I mean, investors have made tons of money, absolute tons of money. What could be wrong with that? What could be wrong with 50% in stock? It's because we forgot the times where investors lost a ton of money. We'll talk a little bit about that. This is Bob Brooks. I'm up against a break. Stick around. I'll be right back. Hello, this is Bob Brooks. Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the exact same verse word for word. I call them the stewardship verses of risk. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. On the Prudent Money Radio Show, we teach about risk, how to identify it, how to figure it out, and what to do about it. We believe that to be a prudent steward, you have to be a good risk manager. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show on Bible School Radio 91.3. Prudent Money, home of the modern day steward movement.
Dynamic, practical, life-changing.
There's no point in going to church and not letting the Christ who gave birth to the church on the day of Pentecost change your life.
Join us each day as Pastor Paul Shepherd applies the timeless truth of Scripture to everyday life. It's Destined for Victory on this great station.
Weekday afternoons at 3:30 here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
This is Rob Randall, your host and teacher of the Invisible War radio program. The Invisible War is the study of God's Word on how to walk in Christ's victory in the spiritual battles we face against the powers of darkness. Join me every Sunday morning at 9 right here on KDKR and KYJC in Commerce, your station for life.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Talking about advice from social media, specifically on TikTok, where they have financial channels, and what you need to be careful about. I talked about a portfolio that was pitched on TikTok, 50% in stocks. Then he goes in and starts talking about 15% in TIPS, which is inflation-protected securities. And the thing that you got to realize is what he's proposed, which was 15%, it really can't make enough of a difference to cover the inflationary impact that you are shooting to cover. So that's one of the questions I would have. And can this fund lose money? Because what he talks about is leaving the 50% alone and allowing the other 50% to produce the income. And we'll get to what I think that income will be, and I have to ask you if it's something you agree with. But 15% in inflation-protected type securities, 10% in real estate. And I looked at this. Well, actually, let me get back to that in a second. 15% in dividend-paying investments, and he actually makes the comment that these are boring types of big companies like Coca-Cola, this type of this type of stock, and they pay consistent dividends. When markets get into trouble and markets go down into bad, negative cycles where you lose the most money, they tend to cut dividends. They tend to eliminate dividends. So dividends are not consistent as a lot of the financial advisor and Wall Street community will have you believe as a sure thing. They're not a sure thing by any stretch of the imagination. So you got to keep that in mind. And really, if you look at the dividend payout of the stock market, it's about 3.8%, which is not that much. That you really need 4 to 5%. So it's lagging there. Something to keep in mind. And I look at one last thing, and I actually like this advice because I don't think people do this enough intentionally. 10% in high yield money market funds. In other words, just a fancy way of saying a money market fund. The money market funds that paid the most were paying over 5% for some time, but that, if you go back 8 to 10 years ago, they were paying 0%. So he acts as if that's a consistent thing as well. And it's not really, because interest rates tend to fluctuate. Thus, the return on that money market account will fluctuate. But I like to have 10%, 15% in cash, just in case there is a big emergency. And cash, how much you keep in cash or money markets, another way to say it, really depends on your personal preferences. So we look at all that, and I come out with, and keep in mind, we're taking the dividends off of these different types of investments. So we look at looking at the past history of that real estate fund. 3.8% dividend was as high as it was paying. So we'll take that. Dividend paying investments, we were looking at about 3.6 to 3.8%. 10% in money market accounts, looking about 3.5%. And you look at all that, leaving the 50% in stocks alone because you may have losses, maybe a down market, and you're only looking at about $1,700 a month in dividends off of a $2 million portfolio during over time. $1,700 a month. I mean, that's like $20,400. Could you do better than that off of a $2 million portfolio consistently if that was something you were intentionally doing? I would hope so, because that's roughly a little over 2% off of your money to carry you through. And so you got to ask, is $1,700 a month off of a $2 million portfolio acceptable to you, given the strategies that are out there? And one other thing, too, is that if you look at $2 million, that affords you to take a lot less and still be able to pay your bills. But $1,700 a month, that's way off of what I would think it would be. And incidentally, this gentleman he should know better, was way off on the fees that a financial advisor would charge. Most of that type of financial platform is, because they want you to do it yourself and they want you to take their advice. Are there other solutions? Well, let me talk about some of the assumptions that I would use. First of all, you've got to use an advisor, and to make these changes, someone who is experienced in making these types of portfolios, who understands risk, who knows how to plan and invest for risk. And the problem is, right off the bat, I'll tell you what the problem is. You're not going to find many people who do this. It's somewhat of a specialty, and to share those beliefs of risk and good times and bad times in stock markets, and to be well experienced on how to handle that. And so you really got to look to find who's going to buy into that type of strategy. The second thing is that they do actively manage. And if you ask the financial media about buying and selling investments and repositioning things, they're going to tell you that that's trying to time the market. You can't win. You can't come out on top. You're going to lose most of the time. And although that's true, you can't time the market, I would look at this as making adjustments for risk, which is really important, reallocating, that type of thing, changing the types of funds that you have to things that work better. Not to say that you can't lose money, not to say that everything can't go wrong, because no matter what you're doing, it's got pros and cons. You've got to understand that. But having a solid plan A for when the market's going up and a solid plan B for the market's going down, what that means, how you invest for it. Protection against emotional decision making. That's the absolute last thing that you want to be doing. And having an advisor that knows what they're doing in this type of environment can help you understand why it makes sense to make the changes that you want to make, and also make the changes that will adjust the portfolio to where it can adapt to those emotions, keeping those emotions in check. If you remember back in 2008 to 2007, it was a very emotionally based time, fear-based, big time fear-based. Criteria-based fund selection, investments that the advisor used, is based on risk and based on cycles and the belief that markets go in cycles, which it means goes into good times for a period of time and goes into bad times for a period of time. And if you're looking at versus the $20,400 at a very, very risk adjust level, you could perhaps get as much as $60,000 off of your money, and that's only a 3% return if you are invested for a bad market. And you can take it up from there. It all depends on how you're invested, and that you're not invested the exact same way for all seasons, because we have different seasons. You wouldn't wear a coat and a long pair of pants all 12 months of the year. During the summer months, especially if you're living up north, can you believe that New York is looking at a heat index today of 106%? I got off the beaten path. But you wouldn't wear a coat in that. You would dress appropriately. You have to invest appropriately based on the seasons of the stock market, and there's definitely seasons or cycles would be the way to describe it. But if emotion's getting a hold of you, you can go to that advisor. That advisor can show you your options, changes you can make, and adjustments you can make, and the pros and cons of that, and help you make a good, prudent decision. Very, very important to have that. How do you select investments for this strategy is a question I would ask you. Once again, asking the right questions. What could my expectations be? Very, very important. What do I need to average growth-wise for my expenses to be paid throughout retirement? Very important. What will it cost me? How do you charge compared to the overall pool of investment advisors in your area? What could go wrong? We already talked a little bit about that. Very important question to ask. And always, I think with anything, don't accept statements at face value and just believe them. Ask the right questions. If that still is troubling to you because you don't understand how money works, it's a little intimidating. I get it. There's a lot of things that are intimidating to me too that I need help with. Bring someone with you. Evaluate the advice with someone that you trust. And but it really does come down to understanding what's involved, more so than getting down into the investments and talking about the investments. Yeah, you want to cover that, but that's not what's most important. What's most important is, what can I expect? What kind of risk am I taking? And be very, very comfortable with that. Know the pros and cons. And most importantly, understand it's an opinion And something I pointed out yesterday that you've got to be very careful about with financial advice is that the vast majority of the investment advisor community has not invested in a market as bad as 2007, 2008, or even 1999 to 2002. Two very disabling bear markets, bad markets where people lost a lot of money over a very long period of time, it comes to the other important question. If I were to lose money with the market and lose a good percent, how long would it take me to gain that money back? And recovery time is critical in this whole equation of risk and making sure that you don't outlive your money. So I hope some of that helped. And if part 1 is on podcast on the website or any podcasting platform that you like to consume your financial advice or podcast. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you have a question for me, go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com, and make sure you send it in because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.